Thanks for joining the virtual Propane Expo today, and appreciate you being here. We have a special speaker today. It's Stuart Flatow, former VP at PERC and safety guru. So Stuart, thanks for being here. And Stuart has actually worked in the propane industry for a couple decades, so he knows the propane industry inside and out. Has probably done more training in this area than most anyone else in the industry. So Stuart, thanks for being here. Today's message is really going to be all about employee training, ongoing improvements, etc. And it's really taking a perspective on the training of our employees and managing our employees to optimize their capabilities from a perspective that I think is incredibly important. It's really it's important for all of us that want to move our businesses forward. So Stuart, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thanks a lot for being here. You have it from here. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for those kind words. And it's about the third time that I'm presenting, and I'm really impressed what you and the team have done with the virtual Propane Expo. Friends, the title of my presentation is Employee Training, and that ongoing improvements are critical. And why are they critical? You want to save lives, you want to save their families, you want to save your workers, you want to save your company. I was at a state association meeting a few years ago, and a gentleman from a safety and training consultation company, good guy, he basically said, it's really the slip and fall injuries and soft tissue injuries that you have to pay attention to. So those are the ones that are going to eat up your money on retraining and things of that sort. And quite frankly, I agree. But I believe it's those catastrophic incidents that could happen, that preventing those will save lives, save families, save workers, and indeed save your company. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the topics that you might have provided initial training on, but it's important to make sure that your workers really understand what that training is. And important that you understand some of the challenges that your workers face when they leave their homes, when they leave the buildings in which they work in, and they go out in the field. And there are so many challenges to them that don't often show up in training. So I want to take a few minutes and talk about some of those things, as well as some of the resources that PERC offers to try to make your lives easier as you train your employees to be professional, making sure that they're reducing injuries and incidents, saving lives, saving families, saving workers, and saving your company. So today, again, we'll talk about some of those challenges that your workers have, mainly your Bobtail drivers and your technicians, and of course, some of your CSRs as well. Some of the topics that we'll be talking about are out-of-gas calls, dispensing propane, personal protective equipment, static electricity hazards, customer communications, new hire and refresher training, and employee development and cross-training. Now, all of these things are a single topic amongst themselves, and you can spend an hour or even more just talking about some of these items. But we're just going to touch on some of them in the context of some of the challenges that go along post-training and why it's so important to make sure that people are doing what they are doing. When you have workers that work outside the fence line, there's limited supervision, whether they're driving their Bobtail and delivering propane, whether they're doing leak checks, they're not supervised. Now, most of these folks do a great job, but sometimes things happen, like we know in Gent, West Virginia, where we had a junior technician doing a tank-to-tank transfer, unsupervised. We know what happened. Lives were lost, property damaged, millions of dollars in settlement. Difficult for supervision. Can we do spot checks on some folks? I know as a safety professional, I understand staffs like that are limited, but can we do some of these spot checks once in a while? Not to play got you, but just to make sure that people are doing what they've been trained to do, and that you are there as the professional to assist them. Some other challenges, and you all know this way better than I do. Weather. Backing up a Bobtail in really slippery, icy conditions, raining conditions, going over bridges that are muddied up, that maybe don't support the Bobtail, really bad conditions that many of your workers work in. How about a snow-covered tank? The customer says, I need propane. You go there, gee whiz, and the tank is covered with snow, and there's no path to lead up to the tank. Now that would make me pretty angry. It's enough that it's cold outside. It's enough that I've got a lot of things to do. But now I've got to deal with this customer who can't even clean off their tank. That's going to kind of put me behind the 8 ball. And it might impact the way I do my job and how professional I'm going to do my job, right? It's freezing outside. Who wants to stay longer than they need to make sure that the tank is filled, to make sure that a leak check is done if need be? These things are real challenges to your workers. And distractions. Distractions are key. As you may know, we have PERC has a Bobtail rollover prevention program. It doesn't teach Bobtail drivers on how to drive. They know how to drive. But there are many distractions that Bobtail drivers face that can result in an overturned Bobtail. And let's take a look at just a video clip of that, see what I'm talking about. Friends, how many times have we driven on our own personal cars and there's beautiful scenery? We look to the left, and before we know it, when we look straight ahead, we're pretty lucky we didn't rear end somebody. Not too dissimilar. I can't tell you how many Bobtail drivers that said to me, Stuart, you know, I thought I was the only one when that happened. Or maybe I'm just putting some food in my mouth. I take my eye off the road, and because of the nature, the top-heavy nature of that vehicle and the sloshing of that vehicle, we get a rollover. It's not that they don't know how to drive. It's not that they're not good people, but they get distracted because they're human beings like anybody else. Let's reinforce that. Now, how about angry, nasty customers? I don't do very well when people yell at me, especially when they want something from me. Do you think when your people go to a customer facility and somebody screams at them, where the hell have you been with my propane? What's wrong with you? You're going to be really nice. You're going to maybe not want to feel like I got to get out of there as soon as I want. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes being screamed at. And yet I bet many of your technicians and Bobtail drivers, let alone your CSRs, have witnessed that. It would be interesting to know how that impacted their work. Based upon what I've said, some of those challenges, let's take a look at some of the topics that I want to talk about and how you may want to reinforce what your people are doing and what your policies are and why sometimes things might not go right. Let's talk about odor or out of gas calls, right? Customer calls, says, I smell something. I think it's kind of stinky. I think I'm out of gas. My pilot light's off, right? That's all you got to know, right? Out of gas, right? Everybody likes to use that term out of gas. Here's the problem. Out of gas is not defined anywhere in NFPA 58 or 54. The term out of gas is a term that the industry has used, and I understand it, but it's a misnomer, okay? 54 and 58 says immediately after the gas is turned on into a new system or into a system that has been initially restored after an interruption in service. Not out of gas, an interruption of service, the piping system shall be checked for leakage. Not should be, like maybe should be. Interruption of service, check for leakage. Let's look at what CTAP says. Interruption of service is when the vapor pressure in the vapor distribution system is no longer sufficient to allow the appliance to operate. Friends, I don't care if the gauge reads 80% full of gas. Somebody calls and says my pilot light doesn't work or my appliance won't light and I smell gas. That is an interruption of service and you are obligated by law to do a leak check before you do anything else. Not out of gas. There's no such thing as out of gas. That is an industry term. Interruption of service. Now let me share with you an email that I received from an attorney who was not exactly friends of the propane industry. I'm going to read it and please bear with me. I'm an attorney in Kansas City and represent a client whose father was killed in an explosion while he was in the process of attempting to light a furnace pilot light, right? Father killed, try to light the pilot, explosion. I have a question which I need to provide you. So here's some background. Explosion occurred at a small 14-unit apartment complex that was serviced by two 1,000-gallon propane tanks. The driver for the propane supplier who had delivered propane 3 days before the explosion testified that although the face gauge on one active tank that was being used showed 0%, it showed 0%. He determined it wasn't exactly out of gas, and therefore he didn't perform a leak check or relight the pilots. Why? Because when he opened the fixed liquid level gauge, what he called the spinner valve, he heard a hissing sound. He heard a hissing sound, which to him meant the tank still had pressure, which in turn meant the tank wasn't truly empty and must have had at least 5 gallons of propane left in it. There was an interruption in service. I don't care if he heard a hissing sound. I don't care if he heard angels singing when he opened up that valve. There was an interruption of service, and he had the duty to perform a leak check and talk to the people who own that property as it applies to whether he or she should have lit that pilot light. Now, I sent this email on to a defense attorney. I didn't respond. But this issue is out there, and it's out there in a big way. You know, like a lot of you, I talk to defense attorneys, and I have a good buddy, my friend is John Hanson. If you ever need a defense attorney, I would look no further than John Hanson. Many of you know him. He talked to me, Stuart. I speak to a lot of defendants, and I ask them, why didn't you perform a leak check? You were trained on performing leak checks. Why didn't you perform a leak check? Well, maybe it's a scheduling thing. It's a, I didn't have enough time. I had a prior commitment. Maybe that commitment was I had another customer, or maybe that commitment was I had to get home because my daughter was getting married the next day. And that's on his mind. And the workload. I just had too much to do. Friends, my suggestion to you is that if the workload is too much, if there's not enough time, and someone says he's got a prior commitment, you find out why. And regardless of those things, if a leak check is needed, you damn well do that leak check. No clear procedure. That is inexcusable for anyone that's working for you to fill a tank without any clear procedure on when a leak check is required. Inexcusable. Oh, it was done last month. Okay. And people have actually said this. Defendants have said these things. It was done last month. So what? I go to a doctor and I say, doc, I've been having like serious headache. I mean, headaches that are just killing me. I think I need a brain scan. Well, Stu, you had a brain scan last month. We ain't going to do it again. So what if the leak check was done last month? So what if you had a brain scan done last month? The issue right now is that your customer said that he's out of gas because they don't know about interruption of service terms, and that my appliances will not light. Doesn't matter if a leak check was done last month. I wasn't asked to. Do you believe that? Friends, you are propane professionals. You are energy professionals. People count on you. Your drivers and technicians have specialized knowledge that your customers have no idea about. No idea. Could you imagine, again, using a doctor analogy, and, someone says, well, why didn't that doctor perform that test on you? Doctor, why didn't you perform that test on this patient that, could have saved his life because we would have diagnosed something? The doctor says, well, you didn't ask me to, right? You would think that person would have to lose their license, if not go to jail. We hear this a lot. It's too cold. We said that earlier, how weather is a challenge, and I empathize with that. It can be really, really cold, freezing outside. It's no excuse not to do a leak check in an interruption of service call. No excuse at all. You're professionals. If you believe it's too cold, don't fill the tank. Get somebody else to do it. You're not feeling well, and you're getting the chills, you got a little fever, you shouldn't be out there to begin with. You're propane professionals. People count on you. You have specialized knowledge that they don't have. The customer didn't say they were out of gas. So what? They said their appliances won't light. That's all you need to know. Customer doesn't know. They may say, smell something, my appliances don't light. You're supposed to understand those buzzwords that the customer is telling you. And the percentage gauge was above 5%. We've kind of talked about that a little bit. I don't know where this came in the industry, where it's, well, the gauge is over 5%, there's propane in there, therefore there's pressure in the line. I can't say it enough. I don't care if the gauge said 75%. Customer tells you my pilot's out, my appliances won't light. There's something going on there. And two of them didn't want to charge them for out of gas call and felt sorry for them. And you know what? Your drivers and technicians are some of the greatest guys I've ever met. And they've got customers for years, almost like family for them. And they know sometimes that, you know, maybe old Millie up the block, who's been a customer for 20 years, is really on hard times. You don't want to charge them, don't charge them. I've spoken to many propane professionals that have said, if my customer can't pay for it and they call me on an interruption of service complaint, I'm going out there and I'm doing that leak check and I'm not charging them. Felt sorry for them because they didn't have the money. Well, you know what? You got to look at the risk benefit of taking that one on the chin, keeping that customer safe and keeping that customer as a customer. Let's talk about nasty customers. And this was an actual out of gas odor call suit in Washington State. There's a beautiful A-frame home in Washington State. I wish I owned that. Apparently the customer called, said he smelled gas, his pilot light didn't light. Bobtail driver went out there. He testified that there was pressure in the line and he didn't do a leak check. He also testified that when the owner of the house, apparently some really nasty old man, nasty guy, came out and he's cursing at him, where you been, blah, 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 this and that. You know, F you, F this. Nobody likes that. When the driver was asked if he went inside and lit the guy's pilot, he replied that the homeowner said, F you, get out of here, I'll light my own pilot. He lit his own pilot, all right. Here's what happened. This is what his house looked like. Hard to write a check big enough for that, let alone that somebody died. I understand it. I understand somebody is yelling and screaming, and this driver testified, and I quote, I wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. You're professionals. You have to do the right thing. And if the person didn't let you in their home to light the pilot light, you have a couple of choices. You're not obligated to light the pilot light, unless your company policy says so. But you have a couple of choices. You could say, sir, I cannot turn that service back on unless you let me light that pilot light. Or you could explain to them, if you light it yourself, you could cause harm to yourself. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And I want you to sign this document. Or you can call somebody else and say, I can't deal with this guy. But when somebody says their appliances are not working, the pilot light is not lit, that is an interruption of service, and a leak check must be performed, full stop. Okay? If I sound passionate about this, it's because I am. Let's talk about dispensing propane. The video that I'm going to show you is a Philadelphia, the propane food cart explosion that killed a couple of people. Let's just watch this for a moment and I'll get back to my point. Now, friends, I know that there are a lot of stories, a lot of points of view about that issue. I'm not here to point fingers. But what I want to emphasize is how critically important it is to make sure that dispenser operators are trained, that their work is observed, and they're documented. And you'll see also in the middle is turnover. There is so much turnover for dispenser operators. Now, I'm not talking necessarily dispenser operators that work at a propane plant. I mean dispenser operators that work in a gas station, that work in a Home Depot maybe, that work in the southern states. You know what I'm talking about. The turnover is tremendous. They're young kids. They live forever. It's really hard to manage. So let's just take a look at it, making sure that people understand that they're being trained on the certain things. We talk about cylinder filling. Got to do a visual inspection. Piping, valves, transfer hoses, threads at all connections, especially brass, excess wear, O-rings, cylinder integrity, cylinder sleeves. Now, again, I believe that 9.999 times I take my empty cylinder to a propane marketer plant. They do all those things. Not so sure if I go to a gas station that happens. As a matter of fact, I know it doesn't happen because I've gone to 10 of them and half of them didn't do that stuff. if you supply the propane, which I know a lot of propane marketers do to these facilities, and I know a lot of marketers do the training, and they record that training electronically or otherwise. You've got to put the onus on the employer, the person who is selling, you're selling that propane to make sure that a new employee came on board, and perhaps ask them that. Repeat that to them, because you are on the hook as much as that dispenser operator is, or that place that dispensed the propane, should something go wrong. Dispenser maintenance, proper PPE. I've gone to a number of places to get my tanks filled. None of them wear PPE. None of them did. I'm not talking about in propane plants. I'm talking about gas stations, places of that sort. They take it, they fill it, and they send me on my way. Document everything. It's not required by law. If somebody comes in and they've got a really funky tank, they're giving you a hard time, hey, you've got to kind of confiscate that tank and document that and send that report to the authorities. Document everything that you did, because even if the tank was in good condition, sometimes people do really funny things with tanks. There was a time where a woman, she wanted to off her husband. She put her propane tank in the oven and turned the stove on, and then called him and said, hey, honey, dinner's going to be ready in 5 minutes. Come on by. Now, it didn't blow up because it just doesn't work that way. But I thought to myself, gee whiz, we were doing these consumer safety messaging materials. I thought we thought of everything. I never thought about telling somebody you can't put a propane tank in an oven. I'm being funny, I'm being a little, maybe too funny by half, but you know what I'm talking about. People do things that they shouldn't do, right? And that's why it's so important to provide them with consumer safety information. Yes, I know it costs a couple pennies more, and I know it'll maybe cut into some of your profits. But friends, if you're in front of a jury or you get sued, and you could show that you provided that consumer safety information, you're going to be loving life a lot more than you would otherwise. Let's talk a little about ASME tank, filling ASME tanks, specifically to RVs and motorhomes, because they're a little bit different. All right, let's talk a little bit about training requirements for ASME tanks, in particular, RVs and motorhomes. Now, let's keep in mind there's a little bit of a difference, right? You have to make sure that there is nobody in that motorhome when you're filling the tank. Now, I could see where somebody says, gee, my wife's got a headache, she's not feeling good, et cetera, et cetera. Is it okay if she stays in the motor? No, it's not, okay? Sometimes you just got to be the bad guy. You got to make sure that pilot lights are off. This is a little bit different than cylinders, right? There are appliances in that motorhome. Make sure those pilot lights are on. The other thing about RVs and motorhomes is that it's just like it says, it's like people's homes. Sometimes it's their only home and sometimes it's their second home. And we know that people do kind of funny things with DIY activity and propane appliances, right? We know these things. We have to be mindful of some of those things. Let's look at some of that training requirements. And you have to have discipline to these things, mental discipline to make sure that you do these things all the time. You have to visually inspect filler valve, threads, and gaskets, fix maximum liquid level gauge, paper surface hose and valves, relief valve, pipe away hoses. Are there dents, gouges, any significant corrosion in the tank? Float gauge bases, data plates. If you can't read the data plate right away, don't fill the tank. Right? Have you done a little leak check using some leak solution? Not pressure test. You're not obligated. You don't have to go through a pressure test or inspect lines that connect from the ASME tank to the appliance. Look at markings and labels. If those things are not a go, don't fill the tank. I don't care if the owner goes insane and apoplectic and curses you a blue streak. Don't fill the tank. The other thing I would recommend, though I don't believe there's a duty to do so, how about a consumer safety brochure? On the right, you could see PERC's propane and your recreational vehicle brochure. Does it cost you a couple of pennies? Yeah. Does it talk about certain things about what you should do and perhaps not do in maintaining your propane systems in your RV? Yeah, it does. You want to talk about a line of defense? That's your first line of defense right there, in addition to documenting training. It's critically important, friends. Critically important, especially, again, there is so much turnover for those that dispense propane. And here's a great resource, PERC's Dispensing Propane Safely. People have asked me, Stuart, can you go do some dispensing propane safely training? I'm like, I could, but The program is so good, in my opinion. It's fine doing some hands-on training as well, if you're a propane marker supplying the fuel to a customer. But the training is really great. And I would urge everyone who hasn't used it to train their customers, to train their employees, to do so. And make sure that they're doing those other things and more. Remember, I'm just talking top line things about training on these certain topics. Let's talk about personal protective equipment. This is kind of a favorite of mine. Why is it a favorite of mine? Because a lot of times people just don't wear it. And a lot of times managers don't enforce it, don't understand who actually even needs it. You've heard me say earlier on, to the point where you probably hate me saying it, you're a professional. Professionals use the right equipment. You've heard the expression, real pros don't blame the tools. You need to wear personal protective equipment, you wear it. That's what professionals do. Look at this gentleman. Now he's got gloves on. That's not gonna, see those sparks flying? Take a split second to catch a cinder. Split second. And I've heard it, well, Stu, I'm just doing a spot weld. Well, do those spot welds generate sparks? Well, yeah, they do. Well, you can't blink fast enough. Just because, for whatever reason, we'll talk about some of those reasons, somebody doesn't want to wear eye protection. There's a study by a group called Network Rail. What are those reasons? It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I can't wear it. You know, the respirator's uncomfortable, those goggles, those eye stuff, those gloves, they're all uncomfortable. I get it. It's uncomfortable. It wasn't necessary for the task. I was just doing this for a moment. I was just turning a valve off for a second. I was just doing a spot weld. I was just topping off somebody's tank. I didn't need the PPE. Well, who says? Who says you didn't need it? You thought maybe you didn't need it. It was too hot. Now, I understand that. We talked about weather conditions when things are too cold. You work out in the field when it's hot. That stuff is hot. If you have to put eye protection on, hard hats, gloves, respirators for a long period of time, it's real hot. And the best, it's unattractive looking. Who the hell cares what you look like when you're doing your job and you need to protect yourself from being injured? It's unbelievable, right? But the most unbelievable is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable wasn't attractive looking. You know what's uncomfortable and not attractive looking? This guy is uncomfortable. And that stick with the red tip on it's pretty unattractive. Uncomfortable. Give me a break, uncomfortable. Give me a break, I was just spot welding. You get my point. If I'm passionate about it, I am passionate about it. I've seen it happen too many times. We've got to train our people. We have to have safety meetings with them and enforce why they have to wear these things so they can go home and see their children again. So they're not thinking, oh, so just take a second, I'll be okay. So they're not thinking, I don't need to throw that breaker. I'm just connecting it'll just take a second. I don't need to do that stuff. I know shortcuts. Yeah, shortcuts. Very dangerous, people talking about shortcuts. Unless you're talking about Microsoft Word or something like that. They got great shortcuts. PPE is really your last point of protection. The hazard's always still going to be there. There are other ways of removing, of safeguarding against hazards, where you eliminate it, machine guards, and you just eliminated that hazard, or substituting a less toxic chemical or a more toxic chemical with a less toxic chemical. Engineering controls. You know, it used to be in the auto gas world, auto gas dispensers had them old clunky Acme connectors. You had to wear goggles. You had to wear monkey gloves. But now, with the quick connects, PK connectors, the way they work now, that has engineered that out. You don't need to wear that stuff, wearing some of those quick connect dispenser nozzles with filling auto gas. It's engineered out. As opposed to before that, when it wasn't, yeah, you needed that PPE. Protect yourself against potential eye splash, frostbite. Okay? Let me tell you something. Having frostbite scars is not a badge of courage. I can't tell you how many people I've met. And I used to do safety inspections in farms. And these guys would say, well, Stuart, I've been doing this for 20 years, only lost one finger. Well, that's great. That's fantastic. Look at these scars I got from frostbite. I can deal with that. It's okay. I don't need, well, that's okay. It's good for you. It's not okay for me. It shouldn't be okay for your workers. So what kind is necessary and when is it necessary? We just throw a dart on a dartboard and figure it out? No, we do a job hazard analysis. We analyze where the hazard is, where the risk is, and take a look then as to what type of personal protective equipment is required. Okay? Job hazard analysis procedure which helps integrate accepted safety and health practices and principles into a particular task or job. And we break these things down into tasks because somebody could do a job, but within that job, there are several tasks. And those tasks can present different hazards that may require different practices or personal protective equipment to remediate that hazard or remediate that risk. So the term job and task commonly used interchangeably to mean a specific work assignment. Like I said, filling a propane cylinder using a propane dispenser, or filling an underground or above ground propane tank. There are many tasks within that job category. So let's take an example of a driver delivering propane to a residential customer. Let's break down what that operation, what those tasks might be. Well, the driver arrives at the customer's home, exits the vehicle, walks the property line, should walk the property line, right? Look for things that could impede in bringing that hose to the tank before he actually carries the hose over. Driver unreels the hose. Hopefully he's got an automatic hose reel, but not everybody does. Attaches the hose nozzle to the fuel tank and starts pumping. Removes the hose nozzle from the tank, reels in the hose, goes back to the truck. Right? About 8 tasks, give or take. Well, let's look at steps 5 and 6. Attaches the hose nozzle to the fuel tank, starts pumping and releasing. That's where there could be exposure to the hands or eyes. Maybe some leak on the hands, frostbite, and maybe some splash to the eyes. What we need to know, we know then we need that type of personal protective equipment. If we look at some of these other things, exits the vehicle, want to make sure that driver has 3 points of contact. Want to make sure they've got maybe some good safety shoes that maybe won't slip on the ice while they're walking the property. If he doesn't have an automatic hose reel, we may have some soft tissue back injuries after a while. So it's just a matter of breaking down the job and looking where the potential hazard can be to where we assign the appropriate personal protective equipment, as well as other safety-related items. Static electricity, another one kind of near and dear to my heart. We're going to show a video here. This is a gentleman right here. He's filling a container with gasoline. That could be diesel, I'm not sure, it doesn't matter. And his daughter is here. And his daughter is wearing either kind of a nylon or wool sweater or skirt. Now, why the man would have his daughter right there, I don't know. That's another story. But let's see what happens. Pretty stunning stuff. Apparently the girl was okay and everybody was fine. Thank goodness. Let's talk just a little bit about static electricity and sparks in propane industry and propane plants and facilities. Now, if you look on the bottom right, we all know the fire triangle, oxygen, heat, fuel. Need all 3. And we know we need them within a certain percentage in terms of propane supporting combustion. At 3,000 volts, let's take this at first face value. A static spark can deliver about 1/2 a millijoule of energy. A millijoule is a unit of measure that we use to measure static energy. Okay, so at 3,000 volts, 1/2 a millijoule of energy. Propane mixed with air, 2.15 to 9.6, can be ignited with about 1/4 to 1/3 millijoule of energy. Okay, 3,000 volts, 1/2. So you need less than 3,000 volts to ignite propane. An arc from a static discharge will ignite propane under the correct conditions. And we know what those conditions are. Oxygen, heat, fuel, and within that 2.15 to 9.6 sweet spot. Take a look at this. 3,000 volts is the smallest static spark a person can feel or hear. 3,000 volts delivers 1/2 a millijoule of energy. That's the least that we can perceive it. But at 1/2 of that, it could ignite propane. So we could have a hazard there that we don't even feel or we don't even see. It's a fascinating point. It's a critical point that I want to make as it applies to remediating static electricity hazards. Friends, this was an incident that happened at an AmeriGas facility many years ago due to a static electricity hazard, and everyone in this industry should take their hat off and be appreciative to AmeriGas, because when they found this out, their then CEO, Gene Bissell, wonderful man. So we have to share this information with the industry. We've learned a lot of things. And indeed, they did a lot of surveys. They did a lot of things that really, in my opinion, have reduced this hazard industry-wide. Here's something that happened. In Yuba City, California, a plant manager reported a possible fire in the filling area. Several employees reported hearing a pop sound, and others reported seeing flashes and thought they were reflections from passing vehicles. Now, right there and there is really important, of course, to encourage your workers to report things that they think is kind of odd, kind of weird, kind of out of character. Investigation of the area didn't find any evidence of fire, but a surveillance camera was installed outside the filling area. The camera caught the moment that gas released from the service valve connection was ignited by a static spark. It's a 1 in a million chance. The spark was given off by the employee's clothing, who was wearing some type of wool or nylon. And here's the picture of that, right here. That's the spark. It was a millisecond. Can't see it, can't feel it, can't hear it. Fortunately, conditions were not right, and there was not an ignition. But that was very telling to our friends at AmeriGas, and they started instituting some significant controls, really significant controls. There are many sources of static electricity in the propane industry. Let me just narrate this. We see shrink wrap, all this plastic wrap that we know that tanks are in, and the wind blowing over that shrink wrap can cause a static charge. And we know that in the presence of propane, or that propane rolling through a small opening can cause static. Removing plastic sleeves, plastic pallets, all of those things can cause a static charge within a propane plant that does those operations. What are some what we call static control areas, right? Be around, know what's your surroundings, know what's going on within a plant. Are there areas where there could be fugitive emissions of propane, like we're seeing in front of us? Those are all static control areas. Those are areas where we have to make sure that these two gentlemen we see are not wearing nylon, are not wearing wool, are grounded. Okay, we have to have the proper signage. We have to make sure they're protected so that they are not sources of static. We want to make sure that as we're filling tanks, any type of tank, we tell customers, I'm sorry, you can't come here. We don't know what they're wearing. They could be charged with a static charge. Appropriate footwear that disseminates a static charge. Appropriate static safe paint or mats or heel grounders. Anywhere we know that there are tanks that are left outside that are ready to be scrapped. They may be causing some vapor to escape. All of these things that we're seeing here can all be areas where there could be static discharge, and they must be controlled. This gentleman is measuring from some of that. And as I mentioned, garments that avoid snap, crackle, and yes, pop when you put them on. Just like a wool sweater. When you hear and you could see a spark, get rid of all that plastic. Take it away from areas where there could be some propane vapor. And you could have static safe spray on top of those cylinders as they're being serviced, following codes for grounding and bonding equipment. It's incredibly important. The chances of a static electricity hazard at a propane plant, they're pretty slim. They really are. As we know, everything has to line up. But when they do happen, it can be catastrophic. And the good news is it doesn't take a lot of money or a lot of effort to reduce that risk. Okay. Here's another resource: static electricity in the propane industry. If you haven't had that or seen it, get it. Get it right after I'm talking to you. One of my favorites is customer communications. Friends, remember that your customers have so little knowledge about what you do. You're doing a gas check, you're doing a home safety inspection. Explain to the customer what that inspection is going to entail. And explain to them what it's not going to entail. Explain to them that you can't do things that are hidden, that are inaccessible to you, and make sure that's documented. Other types of customer communication, here's something that's always kind of got my goat. Just about every marketing and communication person I knew has said, talking about safety will scare customers. And they won't understand it. So we're just not going to do it. Stuart, if we talk about safety to customers, they'll be so scared, they'll be afraid to use the product. Well, friends, we did focus groups conducted by a great company, Logica 3, great communications firm I worked with for years, to gain insight on customer reviews of our consumer safety materials that PERC updated a couple of years ago. And it showed that these communications and marketing experts were wrong. They were just dead wrong. We did focus groups with users and non-users, over 100 people disparate across the country. 97% said they'd read, share, and save the information. Well, that made me feel pretty good because I was in charge of the project. 94% said it was easy to understand. It is critical to talk to a customer in a language they understand. You start talking to a customer about acronyms, you might as well not say anything to them. 86% said it was a good balance of safety and warning information, and these last two. 81% agrees this shows a commitment to safety. It shows your company is committed to safety. That's gold, my friends. Gold. Just think about people that enter your home, people you visit. You want them to be as committed to safety as you are. And 63% said they would do something different about safety. 63% of people said they would actually change their behavior. That's unheard of. Companies spend millions and millions of dollars to get 2% of people to change their behavior. And upon reading this, they said they would do something different about safety. Probably not take chances that they might otherwise would have. But they weren't scared, and they embraced it with open arms. It's an incredibly important point that I want to make. There are tons of great resources at PERC, and I'm so proud to have been part of them. Can you smell it? Here's something where you could email your customers, takes them through a slide presentation they could share with their families. Not too long ago, we did a series of videos. How to read a tank gauge. We did focus groups years ago. People they're uncomfortable about the tank because they think they need to do something, but they don't know what that is, and they don't even know how to read the tank gauge. Send these to your customers. Send them as part of a marketing campaign that you care about them. Hey, we want you to understand how to do this. It's not rocket science. It gives them peace of mind. Safety is about having a peace of mind. We don't want to make people feel safe. We want them to never feel unsafe. Let me say that again. It's hard to make people who feel unsafe to make them feel safe. What we want to do is make sure they never feel unsafe. Like flying on a plane. I fly on a plane, not lately. But I don't have a qualm about it. I don't have that sense of it, but that's me. Carbon monoxide is probably the #1 killer in any gaseous material. Incomplete combustion, people do things they shouldn't do. Consider, you don't have to send them to everybody, but maybe on your customer or your driver technician visits. Give them a CO2 brochure. You know, go with it through them. Important propane safety information. If you're not giving these to your customers, you're not doing yourself a favor. I don't want to say you have to do it, but you damn well better. Important safety information about different types of piping. And in this one in particular was corrugated piping. That was problems with electric strikes and high snowfall. Some of your customers live in snowfall, and I'm not talking a foot of snow. I'm talking about 12 feet of snow. I'm talking about snow that is so intense that it could damage the tank and it could damage the regulator if it's not protected properly. Consider these things. I know they add a couple of bucks to the bottom line. Matter of fact, I know one propane marketer in particular that has 2 airplanes and complained that our materials were too expensive. Go figure that. Go figure that for values. Get off my soapbox for a minute. When we look at these propane safety materials, we want to make sure that our customers read them and understand them. Right? I mean, we're sending them to them. We want them to know it. Do your drivers or CSRs or technicians, do they know what's in these things? Could they talk about them? If a customer asks, can they go through this brochure real quickly and give them the highlights? We want our customers to know them. Shouldn't our employees know them also? And think about the role of warnings in your training. I'm a big believer that training could be, it doesn't have to be an all-day affair after the initial training. Really great reminders. So have an example, right? You could take these brochures, you could take slides like this and have a safety meeting just on this brochure to talk about what's in it, to explain to them how carbon monoxide behaves in the human body, to explain to them what's in there and why people doing their own maintenance work, such as capping lines, or should I say not capping lines, how critically important that is. They don't have to be able to memorize these things. But what a great, easy way to have a safety meeting to give everybody one of these and go through the brochure with them. They're professionals. Let's maintain their professionality with knowledge. And again, lighting pilots. Somebody wants to light their own pilot, unless you've got policies against it, what are you going to do, right? But maybe you could show them this. Go, look, here is the difficulty. Here is the threat and the danger you face if you light your own pilot light. I'm not trying to do it to make a couple extra bucks. It's because I'm a professional. I'm here to service you. I'm here to keep you warm, and I'm here to keep you safe. And if that means saving you from yourself, well, then so be it. Let's take just a couple of minutes before we wrap up and talk about new hires and refresher training. We know that NFPA, DOT, then the first 90 days of hire, we've got to train folks on OSHA hazard communication standard, DOT general awareness training, emergency response, critical emergency response. It's critical. Remember Gent, West Virginia. Man should have just had everybody get out of there. But he didn't, because maybe he was in the moment. Loading and unloading, commercial motor vehicle driver requirements, vehicle inspections, cylinder safety, materials of trade, security hazardous materials, and remember it has to be site specific. Site specific. Or site specific as you can make it. And we know that refresher training is required every 3 years. And refresher training should not just be rote training. Has something different happened? Is someone doing a different task? Does people understand what the refresher training was? This OSHA DOT training was pretty much the first project that I released when I was at PERC, and it's still a pretty damn good program. It's now available online, lowering barriers to train people. It's always being updated. If you haven't taken a look at it, give it a look. Last thing I want to talk about is employee development and cross-training. It's no secret that we need new people, new blood in this industry. And it's a great opportunity to teach them, to bring them under somebody's wing, to teach them new skills and to provide that training to them. Let's make sure that a gentleman like this, who I'm circling right here, is not like old Joe teaching these young folks how to take shortcuts. Let's consider when we do training to do it in various tasks, task-based training, where if somebody is sick or out for the day, that someone else could take over and do that training and do that work. Let's make people jacks of all trades, but in a very smart way. Let's bring them together. Let's bring them up. Let's bring them knowledge, because new skills are always happening and new skills are always needed. And if you could cross-train younger people coming up, especially with the great tools that are available, learning tools, you're going to motivate these people. but don't teach them bad habits. Don't tell them, well, we've always done it this way, so now you've got those bad habits. Cross-train your employees, right? You're going to do refresher training, you're going to do some on-site training, you're going to do some observations, a great opportunity to cross-train the various tasks that is needed for a specific job so that your other employees can do it. Friends, you might have heard me say this before. Sometimes I got a chip on my shoulder, if that hasn't been obvious already. I've heard this so many times. Oh, Stuart, you're the safe. Oh, is it safe? Is it safe? Ha, 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 blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. You know, I want to say, you ask me that one more time, it's not going to be safe for you. Well, we've heard, and I've heard from one of my professionals, colleagues that I know, incidents and accidents are down. Guess we don't need to invest in safety anymore, they say with a chuckle. We'll post a funny notice, no hiding in restroom during safety meetings. And maybe that's because your safety meetings are boring as all get out. But this notion that, let's just see, oh, safety is just, it just gets in the way. Or the incidents are down. So we can all laugh about that, right? And I've had people laugh at me and make fun. Yeah, it's real funny, isn't it? It's real funny until someone gets hurt. Friends, I have never had to go to someone's home. Thank goodness I've never had to go to someone's home and tell somebody that their loved one is not coming back, either because they didn't follow a procedure, they took shortcuts, they listened to an idiot. I've never had to do that. But I know people that have. And it's a life-changing event. A life-changing event. They never, ever want to do that again. I want to wrap up with just a couple of things. This is why I try to say, Steve, you might have seen this, is my beautiful daughter and my even more beautiful grandchildren. You know, friends, we talked about challenges when people are out in the field. We're all human beings. Sometimes we've had a bad day. Maybe we had an argument with our spouses. Maybe we're going through a divorce with our spouse. Maybe we're having some gut-wrenching experiences with our children. It impacts you. It can make you want to take shortcuts and not pay attention. I think it's important that we try to understand that, what's going on sometimes with our employees, or an employee who's mandated to do training on one day, but he's going through an event in his life that he just can't concentrate on. What good is that training? I'm not saying we have to be so invasive about people's lives, but these are our workers. These are our family. And quite frankly, these are the ones that are making money for it. Sometimes there are things going on in their lives, and they're just like, screw it. I'm going to do this job and get out of here. Or, you know what? I just don't care. I'm doing it and moving on. But they just can't deal with that irate customer. And they say something or do something that they wish they didn't, which at another time they might not have. I think that's important. I think people's state of mind is important. And I think it's important to talk about in safety meetings and how they can overcome that state of mind because they're professionals. Again, I go to my doctor, it's maybe I got a brain tumor. I don't care if he just found out his wife was sleeping with some other guy. I want him to be professional. That takes mental discipline. Whether it's too cold, whether it's too hot, whether somebody's yelling at me, whether I've had an emotional event going on in my life, it takes mental discipline to be a professional. And I think it's critical in safety meetings that we talk about some of those things. Friends, my name is up there. My email address is there. My phone number is there. If there's anything that I could do for any of you on or off the clock, please reach out to me. That concludes my presentation. And Bill, thank you again so much for the opportunity. I know we had a little audio issues with the video, but I think we overcame them. And now I'm going to give it back to you, Bill.
Great. Hey, Stuart, so thank you very much. It's super important information. And I do have a couple questions that came in through email. So if it's okay, I'm just going to throw a couple of them in your direction. Is that right?
That'd be great, Bill.
Okay, so one is when it comes to employees, they're out in the back fields, they're in the backyard, they're out with the trucks doing their, delivering fuel or installing tanks. How can we ensure that workers are properly wearing the PPE that is assigned to them?
Well, Bill, I think that's a great question. And how do we make sure they're doing anything? I think there's a couple of things. I think, A, it's important to bring people together. I think it's important to talk about those things in safety meetings. I'm a big believer in emotional hooks. Not a big believer in showing people getting killed and injured and all that stuff. An emotional hook, bringing people together and telling their stories of maybe when they didn't do the right thing and how important that is. And if you can, spot check them. You know, do some spot checks. If your policy say wear that PPE and they're not doing it, there should be consequences for that.
Yeah, okay, that's good. So spot checking, talking with your guys with emotional hooks that help engage them and help them understand the benefits. The why is about their family, or it's about, they want to be able to see for the rest of their life, whatever it might be. But using those sort of emotional hooks. Thanks for showing those in this presentation to help giving us an example of what that would be.
Yeah, I think because some of that stuff, how people are feeling at a given day, because it's not really part of training. And my belief is that most accidents happen because somebody, an employee did something he shouldn't have done, or didn't do something that they should have done. It's not because they weren't trained. It's because either they didn't understand the training, or there's something else going on while they're on site. And I think that needs to be addressed on a regular basis.
Yeah. It's about leadership, really. A good leader is going to have to care about his team enough to engage them in a way that they would understand it. And each employee understands things differently and values different things. So a good leader really is going to have to know his people to really engage them in a way that's going to connect with them, right?
I agree.
And you might have touched on this. Are technicians required to go into someone's home to light their pilot lights?
That's a great question. I don't believe that there is a legal obligation to do that. All I could say is that I know some walkers that say, hell no, we're not doing it because of the liability. And the others say, damn well, we do it because of the liability. And as I mentioned before, if Mrs. Jones can't pay for it on an interruption of service, aka out of gas call, we're going to do it. We'll eat it. It's your company policy. If you want my opinion, this is my opinion. There's an interruption of service. Appliances don't work. Fill the tank, light the pilot. Somebody doesn't want you to light the pilot, I might think twice about putting those appliances into service.
Yeah, and you gave some great examples why. So in the heat of the middle of winter, when things are really busy, crazy, frenetic, or running overtime, there's a human tendency to potentially cut corners a little bit and to try to, reduce the amount of time it takes to do things. And there's potential that possibly people are taking shortcuts. And how would you coach the audience how to manage that whole, shortcuts potentially in the middle of winter? How would you coach people in regards?
Let me just say, I think most of these folks are professionals. I think most do not take shortcuts. But let's just say a combination of somebody's got something on their mind that's kind of eating them, a family issue, and it's freezing. Maybe they're out now for 5 hours. It's freezing outside. Customer didn't even clear the path, let alone clear the snow. That would make me upset, and that might cause me to just do a shortcut. It's like, man, I'm freezing. They didn't do this. This is good enough. I think it's about bringing your troops in. I think it's about talking about those issues with your people and being really honest about it. And possibly telling your customers, if you don't clear that path and you don't clear that snow off of that tank, we're not delivering. It's just too much for our people to deal with. And what does all that do? If they then it takes some time to clear that path. It takes time to clear all that snow. Now they're running behind. Now, with whatever they've got thinking going on in their family, now that they're freezing and they're upset about that customer who was so inconsiderate, couldn't even do that. Now they're stressed because they're running behind time on the next customer.
It's a real deal, man. And especially if you're doing 20, 30 deliveries in a day, and you also have to shovel half of the paths for those things. It's a lot of back-breaking work, it can be. All right, so thanks for your thoughts on those things. So if some of these propane companies need a safety speaker, a safety presenter, somebody to help them in that area for maybe it's a corporate meeting or it's a once a year sort of event, how could they, do you do that sort of thing? And how
Yeah.
does that look?
Well, thank you for that, Bill. I appreciate that. I know we're not really here to plug ourselves, but yes, especially doing things virtually. I'm happy to work with anyone to coach and have and help run safety meetings, short training snippets, presentations. At I mean, it'd be heck, I'd do the first couple at no charge, you know, and I think that it's really important to make sure that employees, when they have safety meetings, that it's about them, that they talk about some of these things, that it's relevant to them. You know, like the Bobtail rollover training. When I had Bobtail drivers call me and go, man, Stuart, I thought that only happened to me. They're not bad people, but I think they need to remember things. Just as I end my presentation with a picture of my family, you want to bring a team together, you have them show pictures of their families and talk about their families, then talk about how important it is that everybody gets home safe. So yes,
Yeah.
if I could do anything for anyone, I am more than happy to do so. Thank you for that, Bill.
Yeah, and Stuart, so that everyone knows, Stuart is incredibly busy going out and speaking at lots of events. He's asked to be an expert witness in different, serious events that have happened in the propane industry. He's involved in a lot of different things in our industry. So, Stuart, thanks a lot for taking the time to help us, to help the industry, and for sharing this information. Really appreciate it.
Bill, thank you so much. And for anyone tuning in, thank you so much as well. Stay safe. Take care now, everyone.
Great. Thanks a lot, everybody. And so everyone that's here, thank you for being at the Propane Expo. Please go and check out the sponsors, the venues, the exhibit halls. And go and check them out. They're here to serve you. They're working to build newer and greater technologies or services and products for you. So go check them out. And so throughout the expo, there's lots of opportunities to do that, as well as you can see pre-recorded, post-recorded, previously recorded presenters that have been here. It's all available for you. And thanks a lot for showing up. Again, Stuart, thanks a lot. And for everyone at the show, thank you. Off to the next event. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you, Bill. Bye, everybody.